I have always loved you, Regina, Jeremy Tabor whispers to the unconscious woman in the hospital bed. For 3 years, he has been her bodyguard, the invisible shield standing 3 paces behind billionaire CEO Regina Woodruff. He has protected her through corporate battles and watched her raise 7-year-old Rosie alone. But he has never spoken about the feelings he's buried deep, because men like him don't fall in love with women like her. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you are tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Jeremy Tabor spent the first 3 days after the car crashed living in the ICU waiting room and beside Regina's hospital bed. The accident had happened on a Tuesday evening while they were returning from a corporate event. The SUV's brakes had failed catastrophically, sending the vehicle into a concrete barrier at high speed. Marcus, the driver, had survived with minor injuries. Jeremy had suffered fractured ribs and a concussion, but Regina had taken the worst of the impact and now lay in a medically induced coma while her brain tried to heal from the trauma. The doctors explained that the coma was necessary to reduce swelling and give her brain time to recover. They could not say when she might wake up, or if she would wake up at all. Jeremy refused to accept the second possibility. He had spent 3 years keeping Regina safe from corporate espionage, aggressive reporters, and overzealous fans. He had never failed her before, and he would not start now by giving up hope. During the long nights in the ICU, Jeremy sat beside Regina's bed and talked to her. The nurses had told him that coma patients sometimes could hear voices, and that familiar sounds might help with recovery. So Jeremy talked. He told her about her company, about how her second-in-command, Patricia Chun, was managing everything smoothly. He told her about Rosie, who was staying with Regina's mother, and asking every day when Mommy would come home. He told her that the police were investigating the crash, and that the brake failure appeared suspicious. And in the darkest hours before dawn, when exhaustion stripped away his professional reserve, Jeremy told Regina the truth he had hidden for 3 years. He told her that he loved her. He told her that he had loved watching her command boardrooms and negotiate impossible deals. He told her that he had loved seeing her be gentle with Rosie, reading bedtime stories and braiding her daughter's hair before school. He told her that he had loved the small kindnesses she showed everyone around her, the way she remembered birthdays, asked staff about their families, and always said thank you to the people others overlooked. Jeremy knew his love was impossible. He was a former military contractor turned bodyguard, living in a modest apartment and raising his 7-year-old daughter Sharon alone after his ex-wife had abandoned them both. Regina was a billionaire who lived in a penthouse, wore clothes that cost more than his monthly salary, and moved in circles of power and influence that Jeremy only observed from 3 paces behind. Their worlds did not intersect except through his employment, and he had always known better than to cross that line. But in the hospital, with Regina unconscious and possibly dying, Jeremy could no longer maintain the pretense. He confessed everything to her still form, believing she could not hear him, never knowing that inside her locked mind Regina was aware of every word. Regina existed in a strange half-world of darkness and distant sounds. She could not move or speak or open her eyes. She could not respond when the doctors examined her or when the nurses adjusted her 4 lines. But she could hear. She heard the medical staff discussing her condition in clinical terms. She heard her mother crying and Rosie asking why Mommy would not wake up. And she heard Jeremy, night after night, pouring out his heart to her. The confession shocked her. Regina had always thought of Jeremy as the ultimate professional, competent, distant, reliable. She had never suspected that he harbored feelings for her. She had certainly never examined her own feelings about him beyond appreciating his skill at his job. But now, trapped in her own body and listening to his desperate words, Regina began to understand that Jeremy Tabor was far more than just her employee. On the 3rd night after the accident, Jeremy received a phone call from his sister. Sharon had not come home from school. The school reported that a woman had arrived with proper authorization paperwork and had picked Sharon up for a dentist appointment. But Jeremy's sister had never scheduled such an appointment and had never authorized anyone to collect Sharon. Jeremy left the hospital immediately and drove to Sharon's school in a state of controlled panic. He was a trained security professional who had dealt with numerous threats in dangerous situations, but nothing had ever terrified him like the thought of his daughter in danger. Sharon was his entire world. A bright, creative 7-year-old who loved drawing princesses and insisted on putting sprinkles on her pancakes every Saturday morning. The police were already at the school when Jeremy arrived. They showed him the authorization form that the woman had presented, and Jeremy immediately recognized it as a sophisticated forgery. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to replicate his signature and create official-looking paperwork. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was planned and professional. Detective Sarah Martinez, the officer in charge of the case, asked Jeremy the standard questions about enemies and grudges. Jeremy explained that he worked as head of security for Regina Woodruff, a prominent CEO with corporate rivals and critics. He wondered if someone might be targeting him to get to Regina, but he could not understand why they would take his daughter rather than Regina's daughter Rosie. Then his phone rang with a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice informed him that Sharon had been taken and was currently safe. But she was not alone. Rosie Woodruff had also been kidnapped. Both girls were unharmed for now, and both would remain unharmed if Jeremy cooperated with the demands that would be forthcoming. The woman warned him not to contact police or federal authorities, and allowed him a brief moment to speak with Sharon before ending the call. Jeremy lied to Detective Martinez about the phone call, claiming it had been a wrong number. He knew he should cooperate with law enforcement, but the kidnapper's threat had been clear and credible. If he involved the police, his daughter and Regina's daughter would die. He could not take that risk. The revelation that both girls had been taken changed everything. This was not about Jeremy at all. This was about Regina. Someone had orchestrated a plan to take both Sharon and Rosie, which meant someone knew about Jeremy's connection to Regina and was using both children as leverage. But leverage for what? Regina was in a coma and could not make decisions or sign documents or transfer assets. Jeremy realized that the kidnapper must not know about Regina's condition. The car accident had happened 3 days ago, but it had not been widely reported in the media. Regina's company had released a brief statement about her being hospitalized, but had not disclosed the severity of her injuries. The kidnapper might believe Regina was still conscious and capable of meeting whatever demands were about to be made. Jeremy returned to hospital and stood beside Regina's bed, looking down at her pale face and the machines keeping her alive. He told her that both their daughters had been taken. He told her that he would find them and bring them home safely. He promised that he would not fail her or the girls, no matter what it cost him. Then Jeremy left the hospital and began to hunt. Jeremy Tabor had spent 15 years in the military before transitioning to private security work. He had training in tactical operations, threat assessment, and investigative techniques. He had contacts in law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and the private security industry. And he had something more valuable than any of those resources. He had absolute motivation. Someone had taken his daughter and the daughter of the woman he loved, and Jeremy would burn the world down to get them back. The first step was gathering information. Jeremy could not openly involve the police without risking the girls' lives, but he could work discreetly with trusted contacts. He called Marcus, his colleague who had been driving the night of the accident, and asked him to quietly review security footage from Sharon's school. He contacted a former military friend who now worked in cybersecurity and asked for help tracing the unknown phone number that had called him. He reached out to Patricia Chun at Regina's company and asked for a list of anyone who had been openly hostile to Regina in recent business dealings. The information began to come together slowly. The security footage from Sharon's school showed a professional woman in her 30s, well-dressed and confident, presenting the forged paperwork to collect Sharon. The same woman had been spotted at Rosie's private school on the same day, using similar forged documents to take Rosie. The woman's face was clear in the footage, but facial recognition searches came up empty. She was either using a false identity or had no criminal record. The phone number traced back to a burner phone that had been activated that morning, and used only for the single call to Jeremy. The phone's location data showed it had been in the warehouse district south of the city, but by the time Jeremy got there, the phone had been disabled and there was no trace of its user. Patricia Chun provided a list of Regina's corporate rivals and critics, but there were dozens of names and no obvious suspect. Regina had made enemies through her aggressive business tactics and her refusal to compromise on her principles. She had outmaneuvered competitors, blocked hostile takeovers, and exposed corruption in several major corporations. Any number of people might want revenge or might see an opportunity in her current vulnerability. But Jeremy kept returning to one name on the list, Julian Vane. Julian Vane was Regina's ex-boyfriend from 8 years ago. They had dated for 2 years before their relationship ended badly. Jeremy did not know all the details. Regina never discussed her personal life with her security staff, but he knew that Julian had hurt Regina deeply. After the breakup, Julian had started his own investment firm and had become one of Regina's primary corporate rivals. They competed for the same deals, the same clients, the same market share. Julian had a reputation for ruthless business practices and for holding grudges. Jeremy dug into Julian's background and discovered several concerning details. Julian's investment firm had been struggling financially for the past year. Several major deals had fallen through, and there were rumors of internal corruption and mismanagement. Julian needed capital desperately, and Regina's company was worth billions. If Julian could somehow force a merger or takeover, he could save his own company and destroy Regina in the process. But Julian could not force a takeover while Regina was alive and in control of her company. The company's bylaws were structured to prevent hostile takeovers, and Regina owned enough shares to block any move she opposed. Julian would need Regina to voluntarily surrender control, which she would never do unless she was coerced, unless someone threatened the thing she loved most, her daughter. Jeremy's investigation led him to Julian's financial records, which showed several large cash withdrawals in the past month. The money had been withdrawn in amounts carefully calculated to avoid triggering automatic reporting requirements. Julian was moving money off the books, which suggested he was paying for something illegal. Jeremy also discovered that Julian had been asking questions about Regina's security arrangements. Several sources reported that Julian had been trying to learn Jeremy's schedule, the routes Regina typically traveled, and the security measures protecting Regina's daughter. Julian had been planning something, and the car accident had provided the perfect opportunity. Jeremy became convinced that Julian was behind everything. The car crash, the kidnapping, the threats. Julian had sabotaged Regina's vehicle to incapacitate her, then taken both daughters to use as leverage. But leverage for what? If Regina was in a coma and could not make decisions? The answer came 2 days after the kidnapping, when Jeremy received a package at his apartment. Inside was a tablet computer, preloaded with a video message from Julian Vane. Julian appeared on the screen, impeccably dressed and sitting in what looked like an expensive home office. He explained the situation with perfect calm. He had arranged a car accident that put Regina in the hospital. He had taken both Sharon and Rosie. The girls were unharmed and being held in a secure location. They would remain unharmed if Jeremy followed instructions. The instructions were simple. Regina's company had a board meeting scheduled in 1 week. Patricia Chun would be representing Regina at the meeting, with Regina's medical power of attorney giving her authority to vote Regina's shares. Julian had prepared a merger proposal that would essentially give him control of Regina's company. Jeremy's job was to convince Patricia to vote in favor of the merger. If Patricia voted yes, the girls would be returned unharmed. If Patricia voted no, or if Jeremy contacted law enforcement, both girls would disappear permanently. Julian acknowledged the plan had a flaw. Regina might wake up from her coma before the board meeting and try to stop the merger. But Julian expressed confidence that Regina would not wake in time, and even if she did, she would be too weak and confused to effectively intervene. By the time she recovered enough to fight the merger, it would be too late to reverse. The video message ended with Julian showing brief footage of Sharon and Rosie. The girls were in a room together, sitting on a bed and holding hands. They both looked frightened but unharmed. Sharon was talking to Rosie, apparently trying to comfort the younger girl. The sight of his daughter trying to be brave broke something in Jeremy's heart. Jeremy watched the video 3 times, analyzing every detail. The room where the girls were being held looked generic. White walls, simple furniture, no windows visible. The lighting was artificial. There were no sounds in the background that might indicate a location. Julian had been careful not to reveal anything useful. But Jeremy noticed one small detail. On the wall behind the girls, there was a thermostat, and the thermostat's display showed a temperature of 78 degrees Fahrenheit and a humidity reading of 73%. Those were the conditions of a coastal environment. Julian was keeping the girls somewhere near the ocean. Jeremy cross-referenced this information with Julian's known properties and financial records. Julian owned several properties, but only one was on the coast, a large estate south of the city, overlooking the ocean. The estate was registered under a shell corporation, probably to hide it from Julian's creditors and his soon-to-be ex-wife. It was remote and private, surrounded by walls and security cameras. It was the perfect place to hide 2 kidnapped children. Jeremy began planning an assault on the estate. He could not involve law enforcement without risking the girls' lives, so he would have to go in alone. He spent 2 days conducting surveillance on the property, studying the security measures and the guard rotations. He identified weaknesses in the camera coverage and gaps in the patrol schedule. He planned his entry route and his extraction plan. He also spent time visiting Regina in the hospital, updating her on his progress even though she could not respond. He told her that he had found the man responsible and knew where the girls were being held. He told her that he was going to bring their daughters home. He told her again that he loved her and that he needed her to wake up because Sharon and Rosie would need their parents when this was over. Inside her darkness, Regina heard everything. She was screaming in her mind, trying desperately to wake up, to help, to do something. But her body would not respond. She was trapped, helpless, while her daughter was in danger and the man she was beginning to realize she cared about was preparing to risk his life. On the night before the board meeting, Jeremy prepared for his assault on Julian's estate. He loaded his weapons, checked his gear, and wrote a letter to Sharon in case he did not survive. The letter told her how much he loved her, how proud he was of her, and how brave she was. It told her to remember that he had tried his best to save her, and that if he failed, it was not because he had not loved her enough. Then Jeremy drove to Julian's coastal estate to bring his daughter home. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue. Jeremy Tabor approached Julian Vane's coastal estate at 2 a.m, moving through the darkness like a ghost. He had spent 15 years in military special operations before becoming a private security contractor, and those years of training were now the only thing standing between his daughter and death. He carried a handgun, a tactical knife, and a small pack of equipment. He wore dark clothing and had smeared his face with black camouflage paint. He was not planning to be seen, but if he was seen, he was planning to be lethal. The estate was large and well protected. High walls surrounded the property, topped with security cameras and motion sensors. Guards patrolled the perimeter in pairs, carrying weapons and communicating via radio. The main house was a sprawling modern structure of glass and steel, positioned to overlook the ocean. There were several outbuildings, a garage, a pool house, and what looked like a guest cottage. Jeremy had spent 2 days watching the estate and learning its patterns. The security was professional, but not military grade. The guards followed predictable routes and checked in with each other at regular intervals. The cameras covered most of the property, but had blind spots near the south wall where landscaping blocked the view. The motion sensors were set to ignore small animals, which meant Jeremy could potentially crawl underneath them if he stayed low enough. He waited until the patrol had passed his position, then scaled the south wall in the blind spot between cameras. He dropped silently to the ground on the other side and immediately moved into the shadows of the landscaping. He could hear the ocean waves crashing against the rocks below the estate. The sound would help cover any noise he made. Jeremy's plan was to locate the girls first, then extract them before Julian or his guards realized there was an intrusion. He had studied the estate's layout using satellite imagery and property records. The main house had 15 rooms spread across 2 floors. The outbuildings were smaller and simpler. If Julian was keeping the girls prisoner, he would want them somewhere secure and isolated, away from staff and casual visitors. That probably meant one of the outbuildings rather than the main house. Jeremy approached the guest cottage first, staying low and moving between shadows. The cottage had lights on inside, which was promising. Why would lights be on at 2 a.m. unless someone was awake or being guarded? He circled the building carefully, checking for guards and cameras. There was one guard stationed near the front door, smoking a cigarette and looking bored. Jeremy had no desire to kill anyone if he could avoid it. He was a father trying to rescue his daughter, not a murderer. But he would do whatever was necessary to get Sharon and Rosie out safely. He approached the guard from behind, moving silently through the grass, and rendered him unconscious with a chokehold that cut off blood flow to the brain. The guard dropped without making a sound. Jeremy dragged him into the bushes and zip-tied his hands and feet. The cottage door was locked but not reinforced. Jeremy picked the lock quickly, another skill from his military days, and slipped inside. The interior was dimly lit by a lamp in the corner. There was a small living room, a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a closed door that presumably led to a bedroom. Jeremy moved toward the bedroom door and listened carefully. He could hear soft voices inside, children's voices. He opened the door slowly and saw them. Sharon and Rosie were sitting together on a bed, holding hands and whispering to each other. They were both wearing the same clothes they had been wearing when they were taken, now wrinkled and dirty. They looked tired and scared but unharmed. When they saw Jeremy, Sharon's face lit up with hope and relief. Jeremy put a finger to his lips, signaling silence, then moved quickly to the bed. He knelt down and wrapped Sharon in a fierce hug, feeling her small body trembling against him. Rosie watched with wide eyes, clearly unsure who the strange man was. Sharon whispered urgently in his ear that they needed to be quiet because the guards checked on them every hour. Jeremy asked if she knew how many guards there were or where Julian was. Sharon said there were usually 2 guards outside and that Julian had visited them earlier that day, telling them they would be going home soon if their parents cooperated. Jeremy examined the room quickly. There was one window, but it was locked and probably alarmed. The door he had come through was the only viable exit. He would have to take the girls out the way he had come in, which meant crossing property to the south wall while avoiding patrols and cameras. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around Rosie, who was smaller and would get cold outside. He told both girls that they needed to be completely silent and do exactly what he said. He promised Sharon that he would keep them both safe and get them home to their mothers. Then Jeremy heard footsteps outside the cottage. Someone was approaching the door. He pushed the girls behind him and drew his weapon, positioning himself to have the advantage when the door opened. The door swung open and a guard entered, looking down at his phone and not immediately noticing that his partner was missing from the front entrance. By the time he looked up and saw Jeremy, it was too late. Jeremy struck him with the butt of his gun, knocking him unconscious. But the guard had triggered his radio as he fell, and now voices were crackling through the device, asking for a status report. The element of surprise was gone. Jeremy had perhaps 2 minutes before the entire security force converged on the cottage. He scooped Rosie up in his arms and grabbed Sharon's hand, then ran for the door. They made it halfway across the property before spotlights flooded the grounds and alarms began to wail. Guards were running toward them from multiple directions, shouting orders and drawing weapons. Jeremy carried Rosie and pulled Sharon along, running toward the south wall and the blind spot he had used to enter. Gunfire erupted behind them. Jeremy heard bullets cutting through the air and impacting the ground near his feet. He zigzagged as he ran, making himself a harder target, while trying to shield both girls with his body. Sharon was crying, but keeping pace. Rosie had her face buried in Jeremy's shoulder, her arms locked around his neck. They reached the wall, and Jeremy practically threw Sharon up and over it, then passed Rosie up to her. He heard Sharon grunt as she caught the younger girl on the other side. Then he vaulted the wall himself just as bullets struck the concrete behind him, sending chips of stone flying. They were outside the state, but not yet safe. Jeremy's vehicle was parked a quarter-mile away, hidden in the trees. They had to reach it before Julian's guards could organize a pursuit. Jeremy picked up Rosie again and grabbed Sharon's hand, and they ran through the darkness toward the tree line. Behind them, they heard vehicles starting and voices shouting commands. Julian's guards were coming after them, but Jeremy knew these woods from his surveillance. He knew where the ground was uneven and where fallen logs blocked the paths. He used that knowledge now, choosing routes that would slow down vehicles while allowing them to move quickly on foot. They reached Jeremy's vehicle, a nondescript sedan he had rented specifically for this operation. He bundled both girls into back seat and told them to stay down below the window line. Then he got behind the wheel and drove away from Julian's estate, using back roads and avoiding main highways. Sharon and Rosie huddled together in the back seat, exhausted and traumatized but safe. Sharon kept asking if they were really free, if the bad people were gone. Jeremy assured her that they were safe now, that he would protect them, that they were going home. Rosie asked about her mother. Jeremy explained gently that Regina had been hurt in a car accident and was in the hospital, but that she was going to be okay. He promised to take Rosie to see her mother as soon as they were safely away from Julian's people. But Jeremy knew the situation was not over. Julian would realize the girls had escaped and would know that Jeremy had taken them. Julian would be desperate now, his entire plan falling apart. Desperate men made dangerous decisions. Jeremy needed to get somewhere safe and call for help before Julian could retaliate. He drove to a police station in a neighboring jurisdiction and pulled into the parking lot. Then he finally made the call he should have made days ago. He contacted the FBI. The FBI raid on Julian Vane's coastal estate happened at dawn, 3 hours after Jeremy Tabor delivered Sharon and Rosie to federal custody and told them everything about the kidnapping, the forced merger, and the car accident that had been intended to kill Regina Woodruff. Julian was arrested without incident. He was sitting in his home office, surrounded by expensive furniture and corporate awards, drinking scotch and staring at his computer screen. When the FBI agents burst through his door, he barely reacted. He simply set down his glass, put his hands behind his head, and asked for his lawyer. The evidence against Julian was overwhelming. The FBI found documents detailing the plan to sabotage Regina's vehicle, including receipts from the mechanic Julian had paid to cut the brake lines. They found financial records showing payments to the woman who had kidnapped the girls from their schools. They found a room where Sharon and Rosie had been held, complete with the security footage Julian had recorded to prove the girls were alive. Most damningly, they found Julian's detailed plan for the forced corporate merger, including his calculations of how much Regina's company was worth and how he would liquidate it to save his own failing business. Julian's only defense was that he had never intended to hurt the girls. He claimed he had treated them well, fed them properly, and planned to return them safely once Regina agreed to his demands. But the FBI did not care about his intentions. Kidnapping was kidnapping, attempted murder was attempted murder, and corporate extortion was corporate extortion. Julian Vane was going to prison for a very long time. While the FBI dismantled Julian's criminal enterprise, Jeremy sat in a hospital waiting room with Sharon and Rosie, waiting for permission to see Regina. The girls had been checked by doctors and found to be physically unharmed, though they would need therapy to process the trauma of their captivity. Social services had wanted to separate them temporarily, Sharon to Jeremy's custody and Rosie to Regina's mother, but both girls had clung to each other and refused to be parted. They had spent 4 days together as prisoners, and in that crucible they had formed a bond that transcended their circumstances. They were sisters now, regardless of biology. Jeremy was exhausted. He had not slept in nearly 48 hours. His ribs ached from his injuries in the car crash. His knuckles were scraped from scaling walls and fighting guards. But none of that mattered because his daughter was safe, and Rosie was safe, and Regina was about to wake up. The doctors had explained that Regina's brain swelling had decreased significantly. They were going to reduce her sedation and allow her to emerge from the coma naturally. There was still uncertainty. They did not know if there would be cognitive damage or physical impairments. But Regina was strong, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic. Jeremy was terrified. He had confessed his love to Regina while she was unconscious, believing she could not hear him, never imagining she would remember. But the nurses had told him that some coma patients retain memories of what they heard while unconscious. What if Regina remembered his confessions and was horrified? What if she felt violated that he had taken advantage of her vulnerability to express feelings that were inappropriate for an employee? But more than his fear for himself, Jeremy was afraid for Regina. She had been through something horrific. Her ex-boyfriend had tried to kill her and had kidnapped her daughter. She had been unconscious while her company and her child were threatened. She was going to wake up to a world that had been irrevocably changed by violence and betrayal. 3 hours after the FBI arrested Julian, a nurse came to the waiting room and told Jeremy that Regina was waking up. He left Sharon and Rosie in the care of a hospital social worker and went to Regina's room. Regina was moving. Her fingers twitched. Her eyes fluttered beneath her eyelids. She made a soft sound, almost a moan. Then her eyes opened. For a moment she just stared at the ceiling, confused and disoriented. Then her eyes found Jeremy standing beside the bed, and she focused on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Jeremy said her name gently, told her she was in the hospital, explained that she had been in a coma, but she was safe now. Regina tried to speak, but her throat was too dry from days of intubation. Jeremy gave her ice chips and water, helping her drink slowly until she could form words. The first thing Regina said was Rosie's name. Jeremy assured her that Rosie was safe, that she was in the hospital with him right now, that she had been found and rescued and was unharmed. Regina started to cry, weak tears sliding down her face as relief overwhelmed her. Jeremy told her everything. He explained about Julian's plan, the kidnapping, his investigation, and the rescue. He told her that Julian had been arrested and would never hurt her or Rosie again. He told her that her company was safe, that Patricia had not voted for the merger, that everything Julian had schemed for had failed. Regina listened to all of it with growing horror and disbelief. When Jeremy finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she said the words that changed everything. She told Jeremy that she had heard him. She had heard every word he said during his vigils at her bedside. She had heard his confessions of love. She had heard him promise to save their daughters. She had been trapped in darkness, unable to respond, but she had been aware of everything. Jeremy's world stopped. He had not expected this. He had not prepared for this. He started to apologize, to explain that it had been inappropriate and unprofessional, that he understood if she wanted him to resign, that he had never meant to make her uncomfortable. But Regina stopped him. She told him she was not uncomfortable. She told him she had spent days trapped in her own mind, listening to his voice, realizing that Jeremy Tabor was the most decent man she had ever known. He had risked everything to save her daughter and his daughter. He had loved her in silence for 3 years, never asking for anything in return, content to just protect her and watch her be happy. But then Regina's expression changed. She became guarded and distant. She told Jeremy that Julian had loved her once too. Julian had been charming and devoted in the beginning. He had said beautiful things and made promises. And then he had tried to kill her and kidnap her child. How was she supposed to trust Jeremy when the last man she trusted had turned into a monster? Jeremy had no answer to that. He understood her fear. He could not promise that he would never hurt her, because everyone had the capacity to cause pain. All he could do was promise to try his best and hope that would be enough. He stood up to leave, to give Regina space to process everything. But Regina caught his hand. She asked him to bring the girls to see her. She needed to see Rosie, needed to hold her daughter and confirm that she was really safe. And she wanted to meet Sharon, the brave little girl who had comforted Rosie during their captivity. Jeremy brought both girls to Regina's room. Rosie ran to her mother's bedside and climbed carefully onto the bed, wrapping her arms around Regina and crying. Regina held her daughter and cried too, whispering promises that she would never let anything hurt her again. Sharon hung back, shy and uncertain. She had never met Regina before, but Regina held out a hand to her and told her to come closer. She thanked Sharon for being brave and for taking care of Rosie when they were prisoners together. She told Sharon that she was a remarkable young lady and that Jeremy should be very proud of her. The sight of Regina holding both girls, treating them with equal tenderness, made something shift in Jeremy's chest. He watched this woman, brilliant and powerful and recently traumatized, comforting two frightened children who needed a mother's touch. He watched her look at Sharon with the same affection she showed Rosie, and he realized that Regina understood something fundamental. These two girls were connected now, bonded by trauma and survival, and they would need both their parents to help them heal. Over the following weeks, Regina recovered from her injuries and began the slow process of reclaiming her life. She returned to her company and dealt with the fallout from Julian's attempted takeover. She worked with therapists to help Rosie process the kidnapping trauma. She attended Julian's preliminary hearings and gave testimony about their past relationship and his increasingly erratic behavior in recent years. And cautiously, carefully, she began to let Jeremy into her life beyond his role as her bodyguard. It started small. Regina invited Jeremy and Sharon to dinner at her penthouse so the girls could have a play date. The girls were inseparable now, and separating them seemed cruel. During the dinner, Regina and Jeremy talked, really talked, for the first time in 3 years beyond professional necessities. They talked about being single parents. They talked about their fears for their daughters. They talked about the trauma of the kidnapping and how they were both struggling with guilt and nightmares. Jeremy learned that Regina's marriage had ended badly, with her ex-husband abandoning her when she was pregnant with Rosie because he had not wanted the responsibility of fatherhood. Regina learned that Jeremy's ex-wife had left when Sharon was 2, unable to handle motherhood and unwilling to try. They had both been wounded by betrayal, and they had both channeled their pain into being the best parents they could be for their daughters. The dinners became regular events. Soon Regina was inviting Jeremy to stay after the girls went to bed, and they would sit on her balcony overlooking the city, drinking wine and talking until late at night. Regina told Jeremy about her fears regarding trust and relationships. Jeremy told Regina that he understood those fears and would never push her to move faster than she was comfortable with. But despite her fears, Regina found herself drawn to Jeremy in ways she had not expected. She admired his devotion to Sharon. She was moved by the way he treated Rosie with the same protective care he showed his own daughter. She found herself thinking about the words he had whispered to her while she was in the coma, the raw honesty of a man who had nothing left to lose. The turning point came 3 months after the kidnapping. Regina and Jeremy took both girls to the park for an afternoon. While the girls played on the swings, Regina watched Jeremy teach them both how to climb the monkey bar safely. She watched him braid both their hair when they asked. She watched him distribute juice boxes and goldfish crackers with perfect equality, never showing favoritism between his daughter and hers. And she realized that Jeremy had already made his choice. He had chosen both girls. He had chosen to be the father figure that Rosie needed, just as he was a father Sharon already had. He was building a family around the 2 girls, and he was inviting Regina to be part of that family if she wanted. That evening, after the girls were asleep in Rosie's room, they had started having sleepovers twice a week. Neither girl wanted to be apart from her new sister. Regina told Jeremy that she was ready to try. She was terrified of being hurt again. She was terrified of making another mistake and choosing another man who would ultimately betray her. But she was also tired of being afraid, and she trusted Jeremy, perhaps more than she had ever trusted anyone. Jeremy kissed her for the first time on that balcony, with the city lights spread out below them and their daughters sleeping safely inside. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and patience. It was a kiss of a man who had waited 3 years and was willing to wait 3 more if that was what she needed. The story could end there, with the kiss and the promise of a new beginning. But the real ending came 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in Regina's kitchen. Sharon and Rosie were sitting at the breakfast bar, arguing cheerfully about whether chocolate chip pancakes were better than blueberry pancakes. Jeremy was at the stove, making both kinds because he had learned that the easiest way to win an argument between 2 7-year-olds was to give them both what they wanted. Regina was beside him, scrambling eggs and stealing bites of bacon from a plate. It was a perfectly ordinary moment. There was nothing dramatic or romantic about it. It was just a family having breakfast together on a Saturday morning. The girls laughing and the parents cooking, and everyone comfortable in the casual intimacy of domesticity. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. And here's what I need to know. Do you want part 2?